Okay, we are live. Thank you for hanging out with us. So, tonight in our second quarter of prep workshop, we have locked script and legal rights with our lovely team here. And I'll hop off and let you all introduce yourselves. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll just start with quick introductions. Give it a sec. There we go. Too far. There we go. All right. So it's real quick introductions. I'm Sam Grau. I'm a sophomore here at DePaul University. I'm in the creative producing concentration with a minor in sound design.
Hi guys, I'm Emily Schumann. I'm a second year directing student in the grad program.
Hello, my name is Timothy Paternow. I'm a professor here, chair actually of the creative producing program, and I work as an independent film producer when I'm not teaching at DePaul.
All right, so as Leah pointed out, today's topic is going to be copyright and legal rights here at DePaul University. So where do we start? We start with a locked script. So this is coming from a writer's perspective. Once you have a locked script, who are you handing it off to? As Matt Quinn and Michael Villalobos discussed with feedback, this is after it's been locked. You probably want to hand it off to a producer, somebody who's going to look at the script and decide how much money it's going to cost. That'll be a line producer, or if it's even possible, given the budget that you have. Assuming that you haven't had a budget yet, that's when a producer who's going to fund for you is going to be necessary. And making adjustments to the script based on how much money you have are also tend to be in the mix, and that's why it's a collaborative effort between you and the producer. If you're a writer and not a director, that'll also require you to hire a director. But usually here at DePaul University, when you have somebody bringing you a script, it's usually a writer-director. So it's not something that you should be worried about unless you're a writer who's looking for a director, in which case you'll have to accept applications and figure out who the best director is for your work. Breaking down logistics and making adjustments while also maintaining a vision. So if you are a writer and a director of your work, when you're talking to a line producer or another producer about what is and isn't possible for your script, you need to be able to figure out what you need and don't need in the script based on these. I actually had this experience recently with a script of mine. We were originally set to have 50 extras, and my producer went, "We don't have the money for that. Do you think you can work with 15 or 20?" And so I had to sit down and think about whether or not that was something that was necessary for my script. Did I need 50? And as it turns out, I didn't, because ultimately it could be a smaller town and it could be with less people, and you could shoot around that. So these are things that you need to discuss with the director, if you're a writer or producer, to figure out whether or not they're necessary for the script. As a director or writer, does it affect your vision? Think about your artist statement, which Emily's going to discuss with us now.
All right, guys, so the artist statement. This is a written statement that presents your film. They may be necessary when it comes time to apply for grants, to apply to film festivals, things like that. So ultimately, we know that our films are supposed to speak for themselves and stand alone. But your artist statement is a way to connect with the people who are viewing your piece. They might be curious about the creative process, what you're trying to say, and your artist statement acts as a tool to help communicate with your audience and kind of clarify what kind of experience you want them to have. So this is helpful to craft in a way that will be easily understood and enable them to appreciate your work even more. How do you write it? First and foremost, know your script. Know what you're trying to say, and ask yourself if you believe in the story you're telling and its intentions. So some tips for writing your artist statement are grabbing attention. You find a lot of people who start with, "My work is," or "My film is inspired by," and it's good to stand out in the pack, especially in a competitive field like film. So see how you can really wow your audience and kind of catch them right off the bat. Less is more. You shouldn't need to justify the truth of your piece with paragraphs. Keep it short and sweet. Love language. So maximize your impact with good verbiage and use active tense. Be consistent. Let your language reflect the tone of your work, and ask for opinions. A lot of times we tend to be not as objective with our own work. So read your statement out loud and ask others for feedback.
Thank you. So copyright original versus adapted material. And Tim, at any point, if you feel like you have something to add, please jump in.
Okay.
So with original material, much simpler than taking material from someone else. If it's something you've written, most of the time all the time, sorry, it's yours. You can go a step further and register it with the Writers Guild of America, and then from there, no one can steal your story. But the hope is that the people that you're working with, you trust them enough not to take your story and run off with it. Adapted material is a little bit different. What is it, and how does it work with copyright? So adapted material can be anything from adapting a story from a song, adapting a story from a book, adapting a story from poetry. Basically, all materials that aren't in the public domain are adapted material. And this is where you might need to buy the rights to it or option the material. And I know Tim's going to go into a little bit more detail about that in a second. And then lastly, fan fiction versus satire. This is something that there's a large difference between, because with fan fiction, that's going to be something that is based off material that is already out there. I've seen a lot of those with like video games. That tends to be where that is. And if it's not satire, then it's not something that you're able to use in festival runs or other places. Whereas with satire, you're able to use it due to satire law. Basically, what that means is that as long as you are making a joke or making fun of whatever it is that is the material that you're taking from, and that, sometimes that gets disputed when whatever it is comes out. But most of the time, you're going to be safe. Just make sure that the writing is something that is satirical. And you might want to get a legal representative involved who knows entertainment law to make sure that what you're doing is actually satire. But if, Tim, you'd like to talk more about optioning material, that'd be awesome.
Sure. Right. With original material, that means something that's generated from within your own mind, so to speak, or your friends come up with an idea and you guys write out a script. That's obviously a great approach, especially when you're trying to make something like a short or your first feature film. If you want to adapt IP, intellectual property, that's what they often refer to it, then yes, if you would need to option it and do a purchase of it. So that's a little more trickier. It depends on what type of short story, if it's for a short film or if it's something longer. If it's kind of what's, I'm assuming it'd be something maybe that it's a book that's not widely known. Let's say it's not a bestseller in New York Times. Then you would have to contact the author. And I tell people, I say, a lot of times, actually, we were talking about this in class literally just the other night. Black Klansman, that film, the two writers actually were fans. They found out about it on a Facebook post. They're like, "Well, that's an amazing story." They found the author of the book. I think his last name was Stallings, and contacted him about adapting it. He said at the time he let the two, they were in their 20s, write a draft of a screenplay from the book and see what if they could turn out well and what could happen. As it turned out, of course, it turned out great, and they were able to put together a Spike Lee and everybody to make the film. So that's an unusual situation, but that's kind of what you have to do sometimes if you're going to try to get something that's already copyrighted and published out there. Public domain is a great way to go because it's in the public domain. The rule is anything before 1923 is in public domain. So after 1923, you have to kind of research the copyright a little bit more. So I'd avoid going down that road unless you had some inside knowledge of why this book or article, or I should say short stories, available. But yeah, anything that's prior to 1923 is fair game. You can take it you can take it and develop it any way you want, and that can be then your film or your short story. So, but optioning material, I felt like I kind of gave you a roundabout. It is pretty simple. If you do like something, and you're really passionate about it, that's the key thing. If you have a vision for some short or some book, reach out to the author, and I tell everyone, it's your passion and your enthusiasm for that you're going to try to sell the author on. Because if they haven't sold their short story or their book to a big studio or a big producer and it's just sitting there gathering dust on the shelf, then they already have too much to lose, so to speak. And with your passion, who knows, something amazing could happen. So If that's the case, then you work out an agreement with them. And at that point, you might want to have some kind of lawyer write up a contract for you and the author, and for a very nominal amount of money, hopefully you can option that the book or the short story. Can I cover? Is there anything else you want me to cover?
No, I think you got it all. Thank you. It's awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very common. It's just the trick is finding something that's available and you can afford. That's not so easy.
So you actually touched on it, so it's a perfect transition into it. Copyright and the public domain. So if we're talking public domain, as you mentioned, it's anything before 1923 is in the public domain.
For sure.
Yeah. So public domain material can be a really, really good option for especially DePaul students or college students in general, because there's tons and tons and tons of short stories that are in the public domain where you already have the structure and the setup perfectly designed for you. And oftentimes they're really, really good stories that no one's told before. The only problem being is that you then have to adapt those into a screenplay. So that might require hiring a writer or you write it yourself. But I think that it's oftentimes not looked at enough when it comes to college students who want to tell stories because we always want to write our own stories or we have our own stories in mind. But quite frankly, I think it's a really, really good resource to look into because a lot of these stories are really, really good and haven't been told before, and you already have your structure set up to write that screenplay. So that's something that DePaul students should really start taking a look at is anything before 1923, and in particular, short stories. Do you have anything to add, Tim?
No, I agree 100%. I mean, I think we were just talking in the last class, I think sometimes, obviously the period. So if there's a way to take that short and make it relevant to what's happening today, socially, politically or whatever, it's kind of like Little Women, it had all the characters felt like they were today, right? They didn't feel like they were from the 1800s. I think that's kind of the trick when you're taking something that's a little bit older, or period, I should say, is to kind of update it for today's audience. So I think that's a little creative advice there.
So copyright when it comes to use of music. I think before we turned on our live stream, we discussed a little bit about this, but this is a super, super important topic because I feel like especially my generation of writers really, really likes putting music in our films because of films like Baby Driver that have really inspired us. So you can look at public domain music. That's anything, once again, before 1923. But this is where you kind of get into the weeds when it comes to what is and isn't public domain because they will remaster or rewrite or remake a lot of the songs and put them out in a new album. And when that happens, it once again gets taken out of the public domain. So you have to look at then writer's rights and covering a song. And what the writer's rights are is the lyrics, because every single part of that song is owned by someone. Everything from the composition to the name of the song to the album cover to the lyrics. So if you want to use the actual lyrics from the song, you have to get the writer's rights. And if you want to use the composition of the song, you have to get the musical rights to it. So it can be very, very difficult, assuming that you don't have a very large budget, which oftentimes college students don't, to be able to get those. So my advice, because we're doing this right now with a script that I've written, is if you're going to take something that is not in the public domain for music, get the writer's rights and then have somebody recompose the score. Because most of the time what you're looking at is the lyrics as opposed to the actual composition of the music. And it makes it a lot easier because you can recompose it, but then you're just going to have the score because it's really, really hard to rewrite the lyrics to a song. And the writer's rights can oftentimes be a lot cheaper than the composition because those aren't attached to a studio label, whereas your composition might be attached to a studio label where they actually recorded the mix down of the music.
Yeah, I think a great story is Donnie Darko with Mad World, right? When they made that film, they wanted to forget the original band version, but they couldn't afford it. So they could only, so that's the sync rights, the publishing and then the sync rights. So they could only afford the publishing and then they got a cover. So that's what a lot of times you do is you get someone to cover that song. Sometimes the cover turns out in that case better than the actual original song. So it can work out to your favor.
Exactly. So branding in your film, once again, we were discussing this right before class. If you're going to use any brands in your film, like anything from Coca-Cola to Apple to Amazon, these are all things that the brand is something that is owned by these companies. And if you don't ask them to use it in your film, You're not going to get into festivals because these festivals will ask you, hey, do you have the legal paperwork to have these brands in your film? And if you don't have them, they won't show those films because of the fact that you were not given permission to use those brands. So if you need a brand in your film, you should really get in contact with these companies ASAP, which is why, once again, when you're discussing things with your producer after you've locked your script, it's important to realize that sometimes something like this isn't needed. However, if it's a necessity for your film, then it's something that you're going to need. For example, if you're writing a film about a bunch of teenagers in school, more than likely you're going to need phones, and in particular probably Apple phones, because that's what everyone has. As you know, Apple phones are everywhere, and when you contact Apple, you'll have to get a release form from Apple. The one rule that we found that Apple has is that they don't allow any villain to have Apple devices, which is super funny to me. It's kind of an interesting fact, and that's actually how we figured out in Vanity Fair. Did an article about it and how you could figure out who was and wasn't the villain in Knives Out. So that was just an interesting fact that I had.
Yeah.
But yeah, whenever you have your locked script, if you need certain brands in your film, unless they're a necessity, I would recommend taking them out in some way, shape, or form, whether that's shooting without the label showing or taking that prop out completely. But if it is a necessity, such as a phone in a modern day film, definitely get in contact with those companies ASAP and their marketing and branding teams in order to get the release forms.
Yeah, I just chip in that, it's a trademark. So what you're talking about are trademark issues. And so you have to have clearances when you distribute your film on everything in your film, music, logos, any of that. So that all has to be papered out. So the Hollywood trick is to give it to your art department, and your art department makes it kind of look like it was maybe a Nike logo, but when you really look at it closely, it's not. So they kind of basically go through your script, and unless you, like as Sam says, you have to have it, they'll just change it around so that it's legally not Nike or legally not whatever the trademark is, if you were actually to stare at it closely. So we did that. We do that all the time in our movies. We did a movie, Buffalo 66, where the NFL will not give out the trademark, right? They're very, unlike baseball. So baseball is owned by each team. NFL is owned as a collective group. So it was just called the Buffaloes. They weren't called the Buffalo Bills. But you kind of thought we were talking about the Buffalo Bills, but we never said Bills in the movie. That's the way around it.
Very cool. Intellectual property.
So intellectual property refers to creations of the mind. This can include inventions, literary works, artistic works, and more. So often we get the question of should you or should you not register your script? There are a couple options. So you can go to the WGA, which is the WGAWregistry.org. That's the Writers Guild of America West. So that documents the claim of authorship of written works and provides 5 years of legal evidence for the materials. It's $25 to register a script, or you can go to the Library of Congress Copyright Office. This documents the claim of ownership. It's a little bit more permanent and more secure than the Writers Guild, which you have to re-register over a period of time if you want to keep that documentation. So it's a little more expensive. It's $65 for a standard application, and you have to apply online for a piece of work in the performing arts. But at the end of the day, when you're working on student films, it comes down to trusting your fellow filmmakers. Be good to each other and find good collaborators who you work well with. Obviously, as you move into like festival circuits and things like that, it's good to register. But if you're just working on student projects, just work with people that you trust and just, be honest and open with each other. When it comes to grants and giving thanks, just give the appropriate credits to those who have participated, funded, or added to your films.
Awesome, thank you. A little bit of technical difficulties here. Wait till it moves on to the next slide. There we go. Legality and insurance.
All right. So, insurance at DePaul. What does DePaul cover? So, production insurance provides the insured with protection against claims resulting from injuries and damage to people or property. This is coverage that you can get through DePaul when you're using the equipment for class assignments. You're not covered if you're working on independent works that are unrelated to class. So to ensure you're covered, make sure you have agreements filled out with the production office. This includes location use agreements, rental equipment request forms, talent and crew releases. If you aren't quite sure you want to work on something outside of class, but you also think it could possibly tie in, there are two options for you. You can get a professor to sign off on an extra credit work or an independent study. So when you do either of those, you would be covered under DePaul. For a list of what isn't covered, there are some things like driving sequences and stuff that might happen on your own property. Go to the production handbook that was sent out earlier this quarter. For independent projects, it's good to have production insurance. It depends on how big of a production it is, obviously, because production insurance can be very costly. You can go to the production office if you have any questions. They can make suggestions on third-party vendors and things like that. Good policies will protect you as the filmmakers. It'll protect your gear and anything that happens on location. So you kind of want to tailor policies to your need if you're going to get your own production insurance, because each project is a little different and it's going to require different things. Since it gets complicated, because you might have to go through entertainment insurance brokers, talk to a lot of legal folks, negotiate details, it's good to work through DePaul while you're in school. That said, if you have your own production company, you might be able to rely on your homeowner's insurance or small business insurance. But before you do that, it's good to talk to them and clarify your policy and see if they would cover you.
Awesome. And assuming you are working at DePaul, we're going to go through the legality do's and don'ts at DePaul University.
All right, so the do's and don'ts at DePaul. Do you have any potentially hazardous scenes like dangerous stunts, moving vehicles, or prop guns? DePaul prohibits the use of real guns and weapons or live ammo in your student films. If you wanted to use like a prop gun, they have a prop weapon authorization that you can submit to the production office a number of weeks before you shoot. That has to get filled out, it has to get approved. Depending on your project, you may be required to get like a police officer to come and supervise. You'll need to hire a coordinator who kind of handles the weapon on set and does safety training. So there's a lot of steps. So it's good to be aware of what you're signing up for if you want to include a prop gun or weapon in your film. DePaul also talks about stunts. So these are defined as any unique physical activity or hazardous situation performed by an actor. If you have any stunts, you have to include them in a packet that you submit to the production office, and you have to hire a stunt coordinator. Driving sequences are not permitted in productions because of safety concerns. DePaul also doesn't permit the use of animals, and any other information or clarification on that can also be found in your production handbook. I think ultimately this comes to breaking down what you need. And Sam talked about this earlier. Can you get around things with clever production design, camera angles? There's this classic example of a student really wanted an ambulance in his short film. So rather than hire the ambulance and pay all this money just to have it in a shot, he actually angled the camera so that all you did was shoot some red and blue lights off screen that made it appear like there was an ambulance right off camera. So it's just good to think about how you can work around a lot of these things. We also talked about it in my scheduling and budgeting class with Tim about the Breaking Bad pilot. If you rewatch it, you notice that there's a lot of ways that they kind of skirted the edges of how to be smart and savvy and save on some costly stunts and things like that. So like I said, any paperwork, talk to the production office. They're an awesome resource and they have a lot of paperwork that's good and helpful and also just good to start using as professionals.
Tim, if you want to add anything to that before we move on.
No, I mean, I think, yeah, if you're at DePaul, you should definitely use DePaul insurance. That's a great insurance policy. And, you know, that's part of the reasons you're at school right now is to have access to things like that. So 100% the DePaul insurance is the way to go. Yeah, I would just add on with Emily saying that, you know, there was very smart ways to, sometimes when you have a low budget film that makes you more creative and actually a better filmmaker. So, something like with stunts, we were just going through it, and it's kind of funny to watch, something like Breaking Bad, where they had a lot more money, obviously, than we have on these shorts. But they, when a fight breaks out, it's almost they cut away just as the person's about to get hit. The next thing, they're shot, the guy's on the ground, the woman's on the ground, and so you just go with it. So it's a lot less expensive because when you actually do a fight sequence, you have to coordinate all that. You have to have a stunt coordinator. It takes hours and hours. So being creative and thinking of simple solutions, like, as I mentioned, the flashing lights, is what independent filmmaking is all about. So, you're saying, how can we get this shot without actually having to pay like a fortune or go through all this, work just to get a quick fist fight? So there's creative ways around many of the things in your script. You just have to kind of game plan it with the director and the producer and the actors. So I'd hand it back to you after that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right. So it's a little bit of laggy. We'll give it a sec to hop onto that next slide. But I completely agree with you. It's the most important thing is that, like, once that script is locked, you need to talk to your producer to see what you can and can't do. So actually, we're going to wrap up with probably one of the simpler things we've discussed tonight, and that is credits at DePaul and the difference between grant credits and equipment credits. So if you are receiving a grant from DePaul, any sort of money, it is not an obligation. It is a requirement that you must credit DePaul in the film. Whereas if it's equipment credits, such as getting anything from the cage or the camera vault down at CineSpace or a grip truck, it is an obligation that you give them a special thanks at the end of the film, as opposed to an official title credit as an investor, which you would have to do with a credit for grants. And any closing thoughts or any questions that anyone has? Leah, I don't know if anyone has any questions. I have one takeaway for the end if we don't have any questions.
I will say while we're here, a great producer to review, and you can Google it. We're in October, so it's a good producer. It is Jason Blum, who made I'm trying to think, The Purge. He made Get Out, and if you look at all Jason Blum's films, he has a formula, and it's just one or two locations. Maybe if you think about Get Out, there's only a few locations and maybe a couple pickup shots here and there, just so it feels like it's outside and big. A couple actors, one or two actors, and one or two stunts, and that's Jason Blum's formula on every movie he makes, and he's very successful, arguably the most successful producer in Hollywood right now. So when you're putting together your stories, you can think like that. A lot of actors, 50 extras, that costs a lot of money. There was not 50 extras in Get Out.
No.
So think one or two actors, one or two locations, and a couple, maybe one or two stunts, and you'll be good.
Yeah, I totally agree, Tim. We don't have any questions, just so you guys know, so anything else you want to say, totally welcome. But Tim, I totally agree with you. I love reading like student scripts where it's like, oh, there's two actors in one location. Perfect. Let's do it. Like, it's going to be amazing.
Right. And it's the one thing you do, at the end of the day, the story is, story is the most important part, right? But in the back of your head, so like you don't always say, oh, I got this cabin in the woods my uncle owns, and it's like, okay, we write the story and it's not very good. So, you got to, you still don't want to crimp your creativity. You want to come up, when I say as a producer to the writer, write the best story. We'll figure out how to make it later.
Yeah.
But that said, there are some rules in the back of your brain as a writer where you might be like, okay, yeah, let's keep it somewhat, like you can say, I can tell this what I want to tell without having to have all this extra stuff in it. And it's still is the same powerful story that I wanted to tell. So, you know what I mean? There's a balance, I think, that good writers know, like, hey, yeah, that works. I can get everything I want to get out of the story. And it's also something that's producible. That makes sense.
Absolutely. I think producibility is really important, especially at this kind of level. of student films, and even like those very early film school student films where you're most likely writer, director, and financer. It's like if you know I only have $500, then you need to kind of keep that in mind while you're writing your script to know that you can do whatever you need for $500.
Right. And I think if you look at all those some of those very famous filmmakers' early films, which is should be a class, or maybe it is a class. You look, it's one or two actors. I mean, I could go through all. You name a director. It's like there may be a lot of locations because some of those guys or filmmakers break the rules there, but it's only one or two actors because you're following them around wherever they're going on their journey. So, but that to me is the most critical, is to keep the cast small, and then you can do a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah, and if you're lucky, you'll get a name of some kind in that very tiny cast. I know like big names are hard and expensive to come by, but we're in Chicago. Second City is right down the street. DePaul works with them a lot. Like I've seen quite a few student films get some actors of some name.
Right. And what about I was watching Stranger Things season 3 and I didn't realize that you guys probably know his name. Who's the actor from DePaul's Theater School who's the works in the ice cream stand? The boyfriend or good-looking guy. What's his name? The boyfriend, basically.
Yeah, no, he plays Steve. I don't remember his name, but he went to our theater school. He graduated like not many years ago. Like
No.
he's a pretty recent alumni. He spoke at the commencement ceremony for class of 2020. We love them.
That's great.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Joe Keery is his name.
Yeah.
Joe Keery. So my point is, you got the theater school right there. I mean, they're great actors out of that school. I mean, I don't think you have to go too far.
Yeah.
And of course, they love it. They want to be in front of a camera, so it's footage they can put in their reel. So it's like a win-win for everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah, I also think it's important for especially people who are first years, when you're working on student films and you have a budget, you have to remember that that budget is not just for the actual production. Like it's for food for your actors, it's for tons of other stuff. So it's not like everything can just go into physically making it happen. Like there's a lot of layers, and it's good to remember that every once in a while.
No, I totally agree. I'm running our budgeting workshop on Monday, so everyone tune in. We'll talk all about it with the beautiful Martha McGee. She teaches budgeting and scheduling 101, I think it's still called. There's a budgeting and scheduling class at DePaul. Not sure if they changed the name, but we talk all about that.
I think we changed it to budgeting and scheduling.
Oh, there it is. Yeah. Oh, I think it was called pre-production or something. It was called pre-production, and everyone was like, "We don't really talk about pre-production. It's just budgeting and scheduling."
So we decided to call it that.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, any final thoughts by everyone? What do we have any advice for first years? Because that's kind of the intended audience for this workshop.
I would say just challenge yourselves. Like Tim said, like it's all about story. So if you have a story that you want to tell and it's something that you're passionate about, write it and then kind of rely on your peers to break it down and kind of see what's feasible. Especially, I mean, gosh, in the time of COVID, we're severely limited by physically how we can work on productions, but use this time to kind of think ahead to when things are normal again and you can get out there and shoot and kind of just work around some of the logistics because it's challenging, but it'll be worth it.
Yeah, definitely. Sam?
Yeah,
I mean, for first years, the biggest thing is, at least from an artistic standpoint, when you bring that script to a producer, understand that there's that push and that pull between the creative side and the financial side, and finding that balance between the two is, at the end of the day, that collaboration is really what starts your film, and understanding as a director what you need and what you don't need in order to make that story what it is. And the idea for on the producing side of things, that's where creative producing really comes into play, is being able to get as much for that director as you can without going over that budget or using that budget to the absolute best of your ability. That's, in my opinion, where the term creative producer really comes into play, because you really you got to get interesting if you have $500 and, for a sci-fi short, that's where creativity is really necessary.
Right. Well, as professor to the freshmen, I would say just, obviously it's kind of crazy right now, but to take advantage, there are some advantages right now, oddly enough, and being able to develop stories. You have the time, if you're at DePaul, you might be running around from class to class and going, and you know what I mean? And you get distracted really easy, I can imagine. So at least this is kind of a unique time to, if you have an idea, to develop it and to really spend your time. And then when things open back up, it's going to get crazy and you're going to have, you'll have your work done, and then you can hopefully meet people and put things together and go out and make it.
Yeah, definitely. That's all great advice. Well, thank you all so much for being here. This was fantastic. I learned a lot. I didn't know we weren't allowed to use animals, so glad I haven't.
What about stuffed animals? Can we use stuffed animals?
I feel like maybe like some CGI. I know our VFX program is getting beefed up, so.
Yeah, it's true.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so very much for being here.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. And thank you to everyone who's been watching along. It's been great.
Some entertainment from all the things going on.
Yeah, seriously.
I'm not sure what's happening when we hang up here, but all right, take care, everyone. Nice meeting you.